You know somebody has not read the book of Job when they just come out saying, well, Job was just this great guy all the way through. They hadn't read this kind of stuff. I mean, this is how the book of Job typically goes. People know the beginning of Job really well, and they know some cool stuff about the end, and Job gets his stuff back in 42. But when you exegetically comb through verse by verse, what you find is Job says some pretty wild stuff. Job believed that God, what in Job 16 and verse 9? Andres read it for us a moment ago. Job believed what?
God hunted him.
Hated him.
Hated him, yeah.
And hunted him, both. H and H. Hey, that's a alliterated sermon. God hunted me, God hated me, and God's going to help me, right? All 3 points in a poem. Yeah, he believes God hates him in 16:9. Is that right?
No.
It's not.
Why does Job believe God hates him?
Because he believed in the retribution theory too.
There we go. Bang. That's it.
Yeah.
Job believes God hates him because Job, you still have the old retribution doctrine running through your veins too. And Job's looking at his circumstances and he's saying, since I'm suffering like this, that must mean what?
God hates me.
God hates me. God doesn't like me.
I don't think I think his beliefs were the same as the ones that were preaching at him. But see, he knows something that they don't know. He knows that he has been upright.
And that's why I think his doctrine scrambled in his brain. Because
Of course, because he's like, I don't understand what.
Yes.
What did I do to deserve this?
That's the book of Job, Michael. That's the book of Job. On the one hand, he believes retribution, so I should be getting good. But his worldview is being upended because Job knows that he knows that he knows he's done nothing wrong, but that he's also suffering terribly. So on the one hand, he believes retribution, but on the other hand, he's starting to see that crumble right before his very eyes because my hands have done no violence and my prayer is pure, and yet here I am suffering mightily. And so Job can't get rest. But what really has to happen in Job's heart and life is Job's got to change that view. He's got to get that retribution principle out of his mind. Job's wrong about God in this respect because he still holds to the retribution principle. Now, at the beginning of the book of Job, when Job loses all of his stuff, you remember in round 1, and you know, the devil says he's going to curse God, all 10 children die, and I alone am left to tell you, and all of that. It says something about Job at the end of chapter 1, mainly in verse 22, but it says, in all of this, Job did not do what?
Curse God.
Curse God or sin or charge God foolishly with wrong. Different translations render that differently, but Job didn't sin or charge God with wrong. That's true. Here's my question. Throughout this dialogue, does Job ever sin in his speech or charge God with wrong, or would you say that Job 122 holds all the way throughout?
No, he sinned. He sinned.
Quite frequent.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'm glad y'all are saying that because some people make it like everything Job said was good. That can't be true. Saying God hates you and God's setting you up for target practice, God's got archers after you and all of this stuff, it can't be true.
And that would also infer that we are all knowing when we're dealing with God. We're not all knowing. And
yeah.
We've kind of been alluding to that all through the class today, is that we don't see as God sees. We don't think as he thinks. And that's why, even as teaching his word, we need to be careful not to bind on people or bind doctrines on people. That's not God's final answer.
Yeah.
And you have to be careful with that. But we can quickly assess the situation and say, well, that's definitely where you're in sin. Well, then how do you describe 1 Peter 4? If any man suffer, let him suffer as a Christian. How do you describe that? You can't. If someone is not in sin, you couldn't tell that. Peter couldn't tell that to those that were scattered abroad in the first century, that they've been living righteously, they've been serving Christ, yet they've been seeing family, friends, and loved ones thrown to dogs and wild beasts and all things like that. You still have to proclaim the name of Christ. You can't back away from that. These five trials that you think are small and scarce, they mean great to God. So we have to look at the joy even in suffering, and we haven't got to that point. Joe's going to have to see this joy, but that's a great fight we have as Christians.
Yeah, and it also means that we got to be careful not to think, well, Did Job ever sin? Like they're saying Job's suffering because he sinned. Job wasn't claiming to be sinlessly perfect, but Job hasn't sinned in a way where he refuses to repent and he's trying to hide something. And that's the big issue here. That's the big hang up. They misunderstand that about Job, and Job's struggling. And so we can understand why Job's saying some of the stuff he says, but not everything Job says is correct. We need to appreciate that. And also, I think that's why he repents at the end of the book.